right, welcome to another edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. It's Monday, February 21st, 2022. Episode 4 is coming at you right now as we are looking at the biggest selling toys that boys would play with. We looked at the Barbie doll a couple episodes ago, biggest girl toy. Now, the biggest boy toy is none other than the Transformers. We're going to look at the history of that right after this. All right, welcome everybody to the show tonight. Glad you're all with us here tonight to look at this extravaganza on the history of the Transformers. Yes. All right. So let's go to. Normally we would be looking at the Wikipedia, but we're going to get a retrospective of the Transformers in a different way. We're going to be looking at Medium.com. That's everything 80s. The history of Transformers from Toy to Legacy. This is by Jamie Logie on August 9, 2020. It's 13 minutes. Gives you a good history, and we'll read it verbatim and, of course, give him credit. All right? So, the history of Transformers from Toy to Legacy, because you all know that there was a series of there was like 10 different Transformers series. To go through all of that, we're just going to scratch the surface a little bit, all right? You know it. And of course, you can go to Wikipedia and look at all of those and look at that. Plus, we had the movies. The toy line is what we're really focusing on tonight. Okay. So, the history of the Transformers from Toy to Legacy. The story behind taking another company's toy, but marketing it to perfection. And there are a lot of toys and cartoons that burst on the scene in the 1980s, but did one stand above the rest? Well, Transformers were a toy line and cartoon series from 1984 produced by Hasbro and became one of the best-selling toys of all time. Transformers led to an animated movie in 86, but many future toy lines and a series of live-action movies. This is it. The definitive toy and cartoon series to me growing up in the 80s. G.I. Joe was a very close second, but something just captured the imagination differently with the Transformers. I don't remember any other toys leaving me spellbound and in awe. Transformers shaped an entire generation and caused some significant heartache with Transformers the movie from 1986. So let's look back on what, in my opinion, is the greatest toy and franchise of all time. Transformers was not an original idea. The origins start with the Diaclone toy line made by Takara Toys, launched in 1980. It was a line of toys that included transforming vehicles and robots that were piloted by miniature figures that came from the Micro Man toy line. Then in 1982, they put out a line of car robots that also could transform. Hasbro, either too lazy to come up with something or just seeing the huge potential, licensed the car robot toy line along with the Micro Man line from Takara. They would combine both things together to create the Transformers. Now, many of the Autobot versions of the Transformers came straight from the car robot line. A lot of the future Transformers already existed in the Takara toy line, including the Dinobots, Insecticons, Decepticon planes, and the Constructicons. Hasbro executives would go to the Tokyo Toy Show in 1983 on the lookout for some new toys they could import to North America. They would buy the rights and molds to all 28 figures in the Diaclone line. Now, Hasbro had the great foresight to know it wasn't an ideal move to just release a new toy line. Giving the toys a backstory and a character profiles created more of an identity that kids could connect with. A transforming robot is cool, but it's a lot more interesting when you realize they are a robotic race from a planet called Cybertron and are comprised of good and evil robots. Hasbro turned to Marvel to develop a backstory, names, and brief descriptions of each character. Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter and Dennis O'Neil would develop the story, while Bob Budiansky would create the Transformers names and characters. Budiansky was a comic book writer, editor, and penciler, and worked for Marvel for 20 years. Besides coming up with the names and backstories, he wrote interesting tech-spec biographies that were printed on the packaging of the toys. Now, in case this brand is new to you, or you need a refresh, here is the legend of the Transformers. The Transformers are made up of the heroic Autobots led by Optimus Prime, and the evil Decepticons led by the villainous Megatron. They lived on a metallic planet called Cybertron. Both groups would have to leave Cybertron to find alternative sources of energy to revitalize their war efforts. This led them to crash land on Earth where they lay dormant for 4 million years. When they awaken in the year 1984, the Deceptions pillage the Earth while the Autobots attempt to protect the new world they find themselves in. This wouldn't be fully revealed until the cartoon series launched in 1986, but the general story of the Autobots versus the Deceptions was there. The cartoon series, which we will get to in a bit, was one of the earliest and most successful examples of a show being made to launch a toy line. You can read more about how the deregulation of advertising to children paved the way for shows and toys like the Transformers. Now, the first generation of Transformer toys. A lot of Transformer toys would come out over the years and decades, but we will look mainly at the ones that came out in the mid-'80s that would tie into the cartoon and the original movie. The first release of the Transformers included quite a lot of toys, 28 in fact, 18 Autobots, and 10 Decepticons. Of these 28 toys, 11 of the Autobots would transform into cars, 6 into minicars, and 1 into a semi-tractor trailer, Optimus Prime, obviously. For the Decepticons, 3 would turn into planes, 1 would be a cassette recorder, 5 would be many cassettes, kids ask your parents what a cassette was, and 1 turned into a gun. Good luck getting that made today. Here were the characters that made up the first release. You had Optimus Prime and Roller, Bluestreak, Hound, Ironside, Jazz, Prowl, Ratchet, Sideswipe, Sunstreaker, Tailbreaker, and Wheeljack. Those were the Autobots. Then the Decepticons, Megatron, Soundwave, Buzzsaw, Laserbeak, Ravage, Frenzy, Rumble, Skywarp, Starscream, and Thundercracker. And though it seems like a big toy line, they took these from the original Die-Clone series, and most are clones of each other. They would change the paint and the accessories, but the physical actions to transform them would be the same. So it's like they only released 10 to 12 toys. For example, Ironside and Ratchet were exactly the same, and so were Prowl, Bluestreak, and Smokescreen. Ditto Starscream, Thundercracker, and Skywarp. Then we go to Series 2 of the Transformers, and this series was reissued of all the toys from the first set, plus 26 new toys. This is where the branding became much more detailed, and they introduced subgroups. For the Autobots, some subgroups would be the Dinobots and the Omnibots, while the Decepticons had the Insecticons and the Constructicons. Now, along with these new additions, Hasbro would introduce other features on the reissue toys, like the heat-sensitive rub signs. You would rub those little decals, and the heat would reveal either an Autobot or a Decepticon symbol. Seems like a cool new play feature, but they did it to reveal authentication against a lot of the inferior bootleg versions that were now flooding the market. Both releases took place in 1984 and 1985, but were considered as one giant release. The 2 series and all the characters would make up the first generation of the Transformers for the cartoon series. Everything that came out over this time span would be the foundation of the Transformers universe. Then we talk about the cartoon series. Well, the original concept put together by Bob Budiansky, Jim Shooter, and Dennis O'Neil was to become a 4-issue comic book series and a 3-part cartoon series. Both things would introduce the backstory and, more importantly, introduce all the characters that little kids like me would soon see on shelves. The 3-part Pilot Minutes miniseries first aired in September of '84 and was co-produced by Marvel Productions and Sunbow Productions. Toei Animation animated it in Japan, and then later on by ACOM in South Korea. The toy line had a more of a militaristic and robotic look to them, and it was up to the Japanese designer Shohei Kohara to give them a new appearance. He created a more humanistic look, and they were further simplified by Floro Derry, who became the lead designer of the series. The story of the first three-part series is the basic backstory I shared earlier. The Autobots and Decepticons leave Cybertron looking for new resources. They fight aboard a ship and crash land on Earth. 4 million years later, a volcanic eruption awakens them, and the Decepticons are ready to pillage the Earth. The Autobots befriend humans Sparkplug and Spike Witwicky to protect the Earth. The end of the three-part series concludes with the Decepticons believed to be dead after their space cruiser crashes into the ocean and the Autobots prepare to head back to Cybertron. Well, the first official season put out 13 episodes that had already been commissioned and produced before that miniseries even aired. So Hasbro was planning ahead big time, knowing they would bombard unsuspecting kids like me with all the Transformers we could handle. The premise of the first season is that the Decepticons had, a spoiler alert, survived the crash into the ocean and were now building a space bridge to teleport resources back to Cybertron. A basic arc of the season involves the technology they use, which results in the ultimate doom, which was the three-part conclusion where the Decepticons teleport Cybertron in the Earth's orbit. The show aired on Saturday mornings between October and December and played the role of introducing new characters that would be added to the 1985 toy line. Some of these were the epic Dinobots, Skyfire, the Insecticons, and the Constructicons, who were able to combine to form Devastator, and that was just awesome. Then in the second season, so now everything is heating up, kids like me are freaking the hell out after seeing the show and the subsequent toy line. We wanted more, and they give it to us. The second season will release a whopping 49 new episodes. Seems like a large and random number, but it was intentionally done. The 49 new shows plus the other 16 added up to 65 total episodes, and this is the magic number of shows you need to move a series into weekday broadcast syndication. This was imperative because it would make Transformers part of a kid's daily routine. It definitely was part of mine and probably yours if you grew up then. The first thing you would do when you got home from school was to watch Transformers. Not really me. I didn't do that. The show changed up the format. Instead of having an arc or theme to connect them all, each was a standalone episode. This way, the broadcasters could air them in any order and not create confusion among a storyline. This is when things promotion-wise stepped into top gear. Whereas the mini-series and the first series introduced the story and the major characters, the second series was making each episode a commercial for individual characters. The spotlight of an individual character or group of characters would connect to a specific release coming up. This is why when you watch cartoon shows, especially during this time period, you notice that the characters would always address each other by their full name. Well, this was important to identify the character and subsequent toy. They also would refer to any vehicle by its first name, which G.I. Joe would focus heavily on. Kids need to know the name of the toy they would be screaming for in the middle of a Walmart. It wasn't all just commerce, as the series creators made it a point to expand on the lore and create more history. They also introduced the first female Transformer and a girl named Carly, who was Spike's girlfriend. They would also introduce the rest of the 1985 toy line with a two-part episode called Dinobot Island. They showed this midway through the season, and most of these new characters were new Autobot cars and mini vehicles taken from the Diaclone and Micro Change line of Takara Toys. They also introduced the Decepticon Triple Changers, Astro Train, and Blitzwing, and one of the most epic and expensive toys, the Omega Supreme. Then there would be a gap between the second and third seasons to put out Transformers the movie that came out on August 8th of 1986. It takes place in the year 2005, 20 years after the events of season 2. This movie stirs up a lot of emotions in kids from that era, particularly me, because I wasn't allowed to see it in theaters. The movie did a few things. It leads to the death of certain characters to clear away all the discontinued products from 84 and 85, and it introduced a new cast of characters for the 1986 toy release. It also traumatized the living shit out of a lot of kids. Besides the death and violence, it even had some cursing and would lead to the death of Optimus Prime. The makers of the movie did not understand the impact that they would have on a generation of kids as they were just trying to get some new toys out for Christmas. The basic premise is that the Decepticons have conquered Cybertron while the Autobots hold up on nearby moons. Optimus Prime sends a shuttle to Earth for supplies, but it's hijacked by Megatron, leading to the death. Sorry, clearing out of Ironhide, Ratchet, Prowl, and Brawn. The Decepticons travel to Earth and attack Autobot City, killing even more. Optimus returns with the Dinobots, and he and Megatron have it out, leading to the death of Optimus Prime. Starscream disposes of the wounded Megatron in space, while the planet-sized Unicron, voiced by Orson Welles in his last role, Unicron can eat other planets and offers Megatron a new body if he destroys the Matrix, which can destroy Unicron. Megatron is now converted into Galvatron, and he kills Starscream. The end of all of this is that the Autobots attack Unicron, Hot Rod attacks Galvatron, and then gets the Matrix that transforms, rebrands him as Rodimus Prime. Just how Optimus said would happen in their darkest hour, the power of the Matrix then destroys the Unicron. Honestly, this movie is pretty good. I bought it on Blu-ray and the animation is elite. The soundtrack dates it, but it has some vintage 80s rock. I never saw it till later on and did not understand I was watching a 90-minute commercial. Despite the trauma of killing off beloved characters and launching a new toy line, it's still a creative movie and features some big-name actors, including Casey Kasem, Robert Stack, Judd Nelson, Peter Cohen, John Rosetta Jr., the voice of Micro Machines commercials, Leonard Nimoy, and Frank Welker. And in their very last roles, Orson Welles and Scatman Carruthers. Apparently, Orson Welles had no idea what the hell he was even making. To follow the full path of the Transformers could take days, and you've probably got better things to do or not, but we can finish this up together. In the coming years, they will release Season 3, which picks up where the movie left off. The Autobots are now in control of Cybertron, and Galvatron still leads the Decepticons. It also features the return of Starscream. By the way, kids are still pissed about the death of Optimus Prime, resulting in a massive letter-writing campaign that forced Hasbro to resurrect him in a 2-part episode called The Return of Optimus Prime in 1987 of March. They probably should have rebranded him as Optimus Prime Classic, and if you don't remember that, even check out the history of New Coke. There would be a Season 4 in November of 87, and this would bring the series to a close. But the Transformers would not disappear from TV as a 5th season was released. It was just reruns of 15 episodes from the original series, along with the movie, which was edited into 4 episodes. I think I had long since stopped watching at this point. Well, what was happening with the toys? Well, the toys have always been going strong, and not long after the movie, they brought a few new lines out, such as the Headmasters and Target Masters. There were also the Pretenders and Power Masters, which featured a new version of Optimus Prime. Thanks, bastards. In 1987, they would also release the Micromasters, which were tiny versions of Transformers meant to compete against the hugely popular Micro Machines. And by the 90s, Transformers was selling poorly in the U.S., but doing well in Canada, the UK, and Japan. Hasbro would release Generation 2 in 1993. The old Takara Toy Company would take over the production, but pretty much just use the old molds from 1984 and 85 with new color schemes and finishes. They also changed Megatron from a handgun to a tank because of safety and security concerns. And then Michael Bay takes over. Where to start with this? Well, Transformers felt like one of those untouchable franchises that just could never cross over to an actual movie. It seemed like a monumental task, and the technology might not have been there. Michael Bay proved that wrong in 2007 by releasing the live-action Transformers movie. I was generally psyched for this and still thought it was okay. I didn't really embrace the mythos and history of the franchise and made it a little too human. Looking back now, it looks like a masterpiece compared to the other pieces of crap he puts out. I apologize if you love these movies, but they felt like a huge blown opportunity. There's the obvious issue of the robot design. They don't look like we remember, but they were trying to create a realistic interpretation of them and not a cartoon. The first movie had more of an alien invasion feel to it, and it didn't seem to capture the essence of what made the Transformers so beloved. I thought Revenge of the Fallen was better, but they get progressively worse from there. But don't take my word for it. Just read every review and Rotten Tomatoes score ever about them. So in my opinion, and this is coming from him, The whole progression of the movies went from disappointment to unwatchable. I didn't even see the last two. If you had told 10-year-old me that would happen, he would probably roundhouse you in the shins. And through all the ups and downs, Michael Bay's Transformers remained one of the biggest parts of the 80s and a huge part of everyone's childhood. There is no other toy that stirred up such excitement in me, and I watched the cartoon show religiously. As I said, G.I. Joe was a close second, and He-Man rounds out my top three. But nothing captured my imagination like Transformers. To me, it's the toy a kid doesn't even know they want. It incorporates all the elements of technology, machines, cars, planes, action, and a cool backstory to create something that is a definitive part of the 1980s. And there you have it. Thank you so much for that, Jamie Logie. We really appreciate your partake of the history of Transformers from toy to legacy. We'll, of course, give you credit for this by posting this article and putting it in the description so that you can, of course, read it word for word if you want. We'll take a look at some of the great pictures. And look at Medium.com. Now, remember, if you do not sign into them, you only get 2 free member-only stories left this month. So you sign up for a Medium and get an extra one. You might find some other great history of toys there. But that pretty much gives you a perspective from Jamie Logie. Thank you, Jamie, for all that you have written over this article that will be 2 years in August because it came out in 2020. All right, I'm Jason Canio for Retro Toys and Games. I hope you had a great time with us here looking at the history of Transformers. Next time on the program, we're going to be looking at a great game that goes back so far. The dice in the cup, literally, I don't know if they've aged with the game or not, but we're going to look at Yahtzee. Big one. That's coming up on episode 5 of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. See you then. Have a great time. We'll see you on Wednesday. Bye for now.
Don't forget to subscribe to the David3000 Network for great more content like this one.